Oh, welcome back to Wayno's Photos. Thanks for popping in again. And we'd just like to talk about disc brake bikes again today. I've noticed that there has been a real push by the manufacturers to get these type of bikes into the shops, and people are really starting to really buy into the technology. I just wanted to recap on disc brake bikes. Now, if you want a disc brake bike, that's fine. It's just a different design of bike. I believe they have some drawbacks over rim brakes, and rim brakes have some drawbacks over disc brakes. They're not. I don't believe it is a superior system on the bikes. I believe it's a different system. It does have advantages and disadvantages, and rim brakes do have disadvantages and advantages. And I just wanted to cover some of the design and technical parameters of those on the bikes, because a lot of people think that, they're mountain bikes and, this technology's been around for a long time and they just fit these disc brakes to bikes and, it's all good, all singing, all dancing, and what's the deal? What's the deal with these disc brake bikes? Why are people so anti disc brake bikes? They're better, they brake better, and they're better in the wet and all these other sorts of things. Well, let's just have a bit of a deep dive into disc brakes today. Now, one of the key points of disc brake bikes, which is pretty obvious, is the point of mounting on the frame has changed. Like if we look at this bike behind, they've gone from being at the top of the forks and at the top of the seat stays to the center part of the wheel, which therefore brings the caliper of the disc that clamps the disc down on to the bottom end of the triangle near the back wheel, and also to the end of the fork. So the point of mounting is quite different, and you might go, well, so what? So we're going to talk about that. When we move a point on the bike to a different point on the bike, which takes a considerable amount of force, it structurally has to be able to take that force. Now, where they were predominantly at the top of the fork, they were right near a bearing and at a very strong part of the fork. And they were also at the top of the seat stays, where that part has also another integration of 3 different points, which were quite strong. The other disadvantage to mounting disc brakes down by the wheels is you need to put them either on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the wheel. You can't mount them in the middle like with a rim brake bike. And you go, well, why does this matter? Well, what it does is you have a pendulum effect from the center. So what you're going to do is you're going to create twisting forces on the frame. The frame then not only needs to handle the braking force, it needs to, which is a intention force, it needs to also handle a tension force and a twisting force. And this creates a bit of a extra problem to the designers, because most of the racing bikes are driven by weight, and they're getting them down now. Some are even like 600 grams of frames. So the frames have to have strength in those triangulated sections, or the end of the forks, to compensate for this force that's being put in there, which is quite considerable, probably even more force than you can actually put out of your body to drive the bike forward. Now, why does this create a problem for the designers? Now, when they move these braking points, which are mounted to the frame, to a different position at the end of the fork or down to the end of the seat stay, it basically compromises the compliance, because they need to make those parts of the bike stronger. You can't have those forces going through those parts of the bike, have more forces, but just using exactly the same components. They have to be designed in a way that they can safely accommodate those forces on those points. And furthermore, the other points where they were mounted before doesn't need to probably be as strong. So you're shifting those points. They're also mounting them off center, so you have twisting actions. And they're also affecting the compliance of the bike, because they're shifting the strength parts of the bike to a part that actually normally has compliance, which doesn't need to be loaded by the braking. Okay, so where have we seen this in the bikes in the manufacturing? Now, obviously, with a front fork, you can't see it; it's all done internally. But what we are seeing is some designs are starting to are making asymmetrical type forks, and I know Villia are doing this. And what they're trying to do is make one side of the fork thicker or stronger to accommodate this brake being mounted on one side. And all of the manufacturers have also gone to through axles, which is about trying to transfer that load from the one side of the fork, which is twisting, to the other side of the fork to try and get an even loading on both forks. Of course, you can't achieve this 100%, but you are trying to shift some of that loading. And of course, if you have a solid bar rather than a flexi through axle, it's going to do this a lot better than just a normal through axle that they used to use on the rim brake bikes. On the rear end, they're also starting to drop the seat stay connections down the seat tube. Now, I believe this is to try and make the triangle smaller to make that part of the bike more rigid to accommodate those braking forces. But where you get a win with this, because the flatter you drop the seat stays, then you actually are making it more sensitive to compliance. Even though it's stronger and thicker and it's a smaller triangle, because it's more of an angle, it has more shear force on it, so it'll flex more when you're riding the bike. So the drop seat stays, I believe, are part of the design parameters of disc brakes. This is how the manufacturers are getting around trying to make those parts of the bike thicker and stronger, and they're accommodating that by putting the force on that seat stay in a way that it's actually more sensitive and flexing a thicker bar more. So they're getting the benefits of both worlds. So does this really work? Yeah, I mean, manufacturers are always trying to edge closer to making these type of technologies work, where they've got a different application on the bike. And of course, they've achieved this. You know, we've got through axles, and they would have strengthened the forks. They've do these drop seat stays. The designs are slightly different on the bikes, and they're accommodating these type of new technologies on the bike. But I still say that I don't believe that they've fully got there, because the problem is with the, especially the front end of the bike, is the fork is not braced. So even though we can make that stronger to accommodate the disc, we can't bring back the compliance. We can't bring the compliance back into the front fork, especially when the bike is braking, because now the disc brake loads up the flexing action of the fork, so you lose your compliance. Now, compliance is very important, especially in the front end, because if the front wheel bounces and loses traction, and you lose traction on the front wheel, you are going to come off. If the front wheel slides out from you, there's no recovery. You can recover the back wheel, but once you lose the front wheel, there's no recovering. So to me, this is a key thing. Now, people may argue that this is a slight, this is a small thing. That's fine. Yeah, disc brake bikes, they still work, they still run, you can still ride them and all this. But if you're pushing and riding them at the limits, and you're riding and you're coming down a hill and you hit a pothole or something like that, I believe a disc brake bike is more possible for the front wheel to lose traction than a non-disc brake bike. And then we actually have the problem of the front wheel. Now, the front wheel now needs to be made like the back wheel. We can't have a radial lightweight wheel on the front. We need to have a cross-spoked wheel. And generally, radial wheels can be 16 to 18 spokes. When you go to a disc brake wheel, it goes to usually minimum 20, 22, 24 spokes. Now, people don't talk about this much for some reason. I'm not too sure why they don't talk about it when it comes to aerodynamics of bikes, but they don't talk about the energy it takes to spin the wheel. Everyone talks about the shape of the rim and how this becomes aerodynamic. But if you actually spin your wheel, get your bike to spin your wheel, and you hold your hand near the spokes, you can actually feel there's a wind there. It's like it's like a fan, and that's caused by the spokes, and that takes energy because it's tubulating the air, and as you spin that wheel, it's taking energy to move that air as those spokes are cutting through the air. Okay, I'll leave it there. See ya.